There we go. Alright, welcome to Module 10, which is where we're going to start doing the basic configurations on a device. So we'll do some packet tracer step-by-step workthroughs as we go through the slides. Chapter 10's 23 slides, Chapter 11 is 46 slides, which is IP addressing. We'll do these in 2 videos, have a break in between as per normal for a double header, and let's get stuck into what we're going to get through. So in this one we'll have a look at how to do the initial configuration on a router, how to configure interfaces and default gateways. So welcome to where we start getting hands-on in the config of devices. So if you remember early on, we talked about the different modes within a device. So we need to be able to navigate through the various configuration modes to get everything configured. And what we've got on this screen is the bare bones minimum that we should do excuse me, while setting up basic configuration. So when we start a device, we start in user mode, which has the greater than symbol, not the hash, and then we go enable config T and takes us into global config. First thing we should do is configure a host name. Each device should be given a name, because out of the box they all come out with their generic I'm a router, I'm a switch. And whoa, chat just reset itself. That was interesting. Alright, we all still there? Yep, good. Okay, just glitchy. First time I've seen the chat system totally reset itself like that. Alright, so next one we should put our first password in, which is enable secret. This prompts for a password requirement when changing from user to enable mode, or privileged exact mode as it's formally known. Most people just called it enable mode. Then we jump from there to configuring the line consoles 0, which is the physical port that we need to connect to do our initial configuration. So whenever somebody tries to log in to do configs, they get prompted with a password to enter. So password and the password, and then login tells it to request for the password on initial connection. Next we jump to our virtual terminal lines, our V2Y 0 to 4. Again, we set password and login, and the next line is where we want to change it to SSH. We do transport input and we specify what connection type will accept. So the default is basically Telnet, which is unencrypted communications. It's always in clear text. SSH is the recommended connection because it's encrypted and gives us a bit of protection while remotely connecting. Service password encryption means all these passwords we've just entered here on the console and VTY lines are given a low-level encryption, so that basically they are a series of numbers when displayed on the screen in the running config or startup config modes. So anybody looking over your shoulder just can't write them down. Next is we're going to set the message of the day, which is a message that is displayed on login, and the way it is done is whatever character you start after the MOTD, this character here, tells it this is the delimiter for the message. So this is the start of the message. This character cannot be used inside the message. You then close it off with the same character at the end of the message. We exit config mode and we copy the running config to the startup config to back it up, so if we lose power, that initial configuration is saved. So what's it look like when we actually do it on the device? So I've just logged in the packet tracer, our default device, so we'll drag the router in and just double click on it and go to the command line. So this is where we see what the initial startup screen, and the prompt is, do you want an initial configuration mode? You say no, because if you say yes there, it takes you through a wizard, which is a series of prompts, but it doesn't do the full configuration that you need. So always recommend you say no there and do it manually. So user mode, we need to go into the privilege mode by enable or shortcut EN, and then if I just move this over this side, take that down, and we can follow what's there on the screen. I suppose you can't see this on NLA Zoom. No. Alright. So config space T, which stands for configure terminal, and then we just follow those host name, and we'll change it to R1. No, and the prompt changes. So there we type in, and the typical passwords we'll use in Cisco Labs are Cisco and class, and we'll go to line console 0, password Cisco, login, line VTY04, rinse and repeat, password Cisco, login. Now, if I'm just going to use Telnet, which for the start, that's all what you need is Telnet. We'll look at how to set up SSH in detail later. But if you're going to just use Telnet, which is all what we need for the first series of labs, that is all what you need to enter. You don't need to put the transport input. That's only there if we want to change it to SSH. So, won't do that at the moment. So I'll exit out and go down one and do our banner message of the day. And I'm going to say no unauthorized access permitted. You never say welcome in your banners, because if you say welcome, it's considered a legal invitation for people to enter your device. That's a legal precedent that's been set many years ago. So just be aware that you never welcome them. Okay, so I haven't done the password encryption yet. Why? Because I want to do a show run to show you what the current situation is. So here's our secret, and you'll see it's quite a big, longer character set for the actual password. So by saying it's secret, it's using a level 5 encryption algorithm on it to scramble the password. Whereas when we go down to the bottom of the config, which we'll find is where our passwords for our line consoles and VTYs are, they're in plain text. Everybody can see them. So if we now go back into config and do the service password encryption, just hit enter on that and exit, and now do the show run again, and I'll just skip to the end. We now have a minor encryption on those passwords. Now, how strong is that? Well, you can cut and paste that into a level 7 password recovery tool, even on Cisco's home website, to unscramble it. That's how much protection it is. It's only to stop people from looking over your shoulder and writing down the password. Okay? And there's our banner. So, if I exit totally, I've logged out of the system, go to relog in, there's my banner, and I'm now getting prompted for a password. And then when I go to change modes, it's asking me to enter a password again, and show startup config. Nothing's there because I haven't saved it yet. So to save it, copy, run, start, confirm. Now I can do show start, and I've got it there. Alright, so that's our basic intro to the commands. Now, in real life, you don't just double click on an icon to get into it. You've actually got to run a physical connection across your console cable and plug it into your device. But hopefully we'll get to see that next. So there we are. There's our script all typed out, which is basically what I went through with the packet tracer. So as you can see, doing a basic configuration on a device is very quick and easy, and that gives us the basis to build from. Next, we need to configure the interfaces. Now remember, each interface on a router connects to a different network. So what we need to do is enter the interface in global config mode and go to the interface itself. Now the type and number of the interface depends on the device that you have. So in this one, I don't actually have IP interface brief. So it's been too long, I've forgotten how to do this stuff. Alright, so here it's telling me that I have a gigabit Ethernet 00 and a 01. So that's what you would type up here, would be gig GI 00, and then the description. It's recommended that you put a comment saying what that interface is used for. So connection to ISP, or connection to the 150 network, or whatever it is. Then you set the IP address with the IP address for your gateway. Alright, so remember that a interface on a router is basically your gateway address for all the other devices and the subnet mask. Now, if you're using IPv6, you put IPv6 address and the hexadecimal address and the prefix notation. And we always got to turn the interface on, because by default all your interfaces are shut down. Alright, so they're closed, they're shut down. So we've got to bring them up, and to undo any command we put a no statement in front of it. So to close an interface we use the shutdown command. So to open an interface we use a no shutdown command. So what's that look like? So in this example, we're going to configure R1's G gigabit 000 interface. Now, as I said, the interface naming convention depends on the device, because a lot of these are modular. They will have different sequencing on every type of interface. So always do a check to see what the naming convention is for your interfaces on the device you're configuring. So we go to the interface gigabit 000, and we're saying this is the link to our local area network, and we're dual stacking it. We've got an IPv4 address of 192.168.10.1 with the subnet mask, and an IPv6 address. We're turning the interface on with the no shutdown command, and we're exiting out of config. Now, you would rinse and repeat that sequence for every interface that you have on the router until all of them are configured. And that's the second slide. So to get a status report on what our interfaces are currently configured as, we use the show IP interface brief command, and this gives us a list of device interfaces that have IP addresses configured and the current status. So what method was used to obtain this IP address? Manual, static address configuration. It's status, the line is up and the protocol is up. So notice one thing missing. We don't have the subnet mask. So this will just tell us what the IP address is and what the status is. It won't tell us whether we've got a match, correct match in the configuration, because it doesn't show us the subnet mask. So when you're troubleshooting, always check the interface configuration, not just the brief summary. Okay, so if you haven't noticed by now, IP assumes version 4, and when we want to do IPv6, we just put v6 on the end of IP, and the rest of the command's the same. So this one gives us v4 information, this one gives us v6 information. There is no command to give us both at the same time. It's one or the other. So here's the summary of those interfaces. Now, as I said, the show interface command will give us all the information on the interface. That's layer 2 and layer 3 information for that interface. It's quite a lot of information, and I would recommend using it with the specification of what the interface is. Okay, so on this one, if I do show interface, it just starts rambling up, listing all the interfaces one after the other. So if you want to know a specific interface, you do a show interface and you specify the interface that you want information on, and it will just give you that. So here's the status, here's the MAC address, Here's the transmission statistics. Okay, maximum byte size, bandwidth. We'll get into that. Keep wave, whether it's full duplex, how long it's been up, how many packets it's dropping in the last 5 minutes, inbound and outbound, what type of media is connected to it. So it gives you a lot more information about it. And one of the things that it will show here, when the interface is up, it will give you the IP address and the subnet mask. It's the only way to find the subnet mask on an interface. Okay. Routers forward packets based on the IP address of the destination. Alright, so we need to have some form of forwarding table, and this is called a routing table. Now, a routing table by default will be made up of all of those connected interfaces. So what we see in here now is this is the interface that we configured and its address. And what it says is, okay, I've got a specific address on an interface. This is my link. And this interface belongs to this network. So I have a connected network, and this is the link to that network. Next, we have the 209.165 network, which is part of this subnet, which is part of this parent. Now we'll get into parent and child routes and how that works later on. But that's what that is. So a parent is basically the original network that is then chopped into smaller pieces. And the smaller pieces are called child routes, subnets. All right. We'll explain that in detail later. Here's the show interface command, and it's up, MAC address. Here's my IP address, and here's my subnet mask information. It's the only way to get both of them listed. So this one will give us physical characteristics on the interface and the logical addressing. If we do show IP interface, it will only give us the information concerning the IP logical protocol on that interface. So what we use this command for later on is for checking our filters, okay, which is these ones here. We'll have incoming and outgoing filters, and so here's a IP address information, the broadcast address, but mainly we use this one later on to check these lines here. What filters have been applied to our interface. All right. IPv6 version of the command. Now, we have configured our router, so we have effectively configured our default gateway for our hosts. Alright, so for PC1 to communicate to PC3, it needs to have the default gateway set, so it knows to forward any routes not destined for the 168.10 network to the router's interface, which is the exit from the network. Then router 1 will use its routing table to look it up and go, I can send it out this interface to get to PC3. Now, on a switch, we also need to configure an IP address and that. So if we change over to switches, drag a switch in, open up a switch, online. So while that boots up, how do I get to this switch remotely? Well, you do the initial configuration exactly the same as the routers. So you have to go in and set the host name, passwords, all of that. All right. But when you look at the interfaces, so if I do a show interface, I get huge amounts of interfaces because switch is a whole set of switch. So if we do a show run, there's 24 fast Ethernet switches and 2 gigabit Ethernet switches and a VLAN. Now, these are layer 2 ports. They're not natively set up for layer 3 addressing. They use MAC addresses. So we set the remote IP address on the VLAN interface, which is our layer 3 address interface. So you go into here, you go to the interface VLAN 1 and you put the IP address. Now it's got to be an address that is part of the network where the switch resides in. So it'd be the 10.10 subnet mask. No shut. Alright, so we now have an IP address here, and we use the IP gateway. Oh, won't work there because I need to be in this mode. Okay. The reason it wasn't accepting it there is because I was still in the VLAN interface, whereas this command is in a global config command, and I say my default gateway for this network is this address. Now, the slide pack and the slide image in 10.32, if I remember it said it had a error in the graphic, so they just removed the graphic. But basically, IP default gateway and the IP address of your router 1 interface. And that brings us to the end of basic configuration, which we talked about doing the host name, putting passwords on the login of our console port, our virtual terminal lines, our user and privilege modes. We also talked about doing a banner under the message of the day. Went through interface configurations for IPv4 and v6 and the basic show commands therein. So in this chapter, there is a series of packet tracer activities for you to do, and just get used to using that command interface. Okay. And when we get back into the classroom, hopefully we'll got some equipment where we can actually do this for real. Alright, so that's the basics of chapter 10, or module 10 as they now call it. And I'll hit the end there, and then we'll have a discussion about that.